Hello, I'm your host, Skeptical Scott.
And I'm this week's co-host, Artie Fisher.
Welcome to Funny You Say That. The Heathen. There and back again. If you've ever rethought what you were taught and said, I don't know about that, then this show is for you. Please join us as we drop the supernatural, embrace the rational, and believe in as many true things as possible.
Hey, Scott, what is the title of today's episode?
The Bible as Literature. What was life like for you after a K-12 education? For many, it's an exciting time of learning to be independent. You work more. You make more choices. You become more responsible, not just over finances, but for the future and ultimately one's beliefs. As someone who now has their son in college, I can say that underneath the excitement of letting your kid fly on their own is a universal fear. Will they be okay? Will I be okay with whatever choices he'll ultimately make? Ask some Christians. Some will say college is where kids go to lose their faith. I suppose that is why some parents will pay the extra cost for a private Christian college to keep their kids, or is it young adults, inside the bubble. I have found in some religious parents an underlying fear and maybe even disdain for anything intellectual, especially at a public university. I mean, think about it. That whole saying, lean not into your own understanding. There's a lack of trust in these so-called experts and professors. There is the threat that they may brainwash these young adults. Is the devil and his demons haunting our universities? Me, I found college liberating. I was exposed to people with different backgrounds and heard different answers, but saw similar patterns to how they answer the big questions of life. I texted my friend Tom the other day to see if he remembered a particular memory from college, like I did. We were both involved with student leadership in college and worked on staff in the residence halls as well as elsewhere. And during one of our big leadership training activities, picture this, we were all outside in a huge single file circle with a large crew of student leaders. The facilitator had a blowhorn and guided us in an icebreaker. She would say things like, if you have a summer birthday, step forward. And then all of those with summer birthdays would mingle in the middle of the circle for a short amount of time, then would be instructed to go back to a new spot on the outside ring of the circle. Other prompts were things like those who come from a different state, or those who have more than 3 siblings, or those who love pizza, etc. I texted Tom, do you remember what was asked when it was just you and I to enter the circle? He texted back, wasn't it those who consider themselves agnostic? It was. I just remember it being a little awkward because right before that, the question had been those who consider themselves Christian. And that group who mingled in the middle was huge.
Oh, no.
So when Tom and I stepped forward after being prompted, those who are agnostic, we were happy to see that we were not absolutely alone. We saw each other from across the circle, and I signaled chest bump. We quickly ran forward, did a manly chest bump, and traded spaces around the big circle. I guess the demons of doubt haunting the university had only captured 2 student leaders so far. I was lucky enough to already have picked my college roommate for freshman year, a friend I had known in high school. Let's call him Eddie. As different as we were, we cracked each other up, and we were laid back. We are friends to this day. I really am grateful. And yes, we got along and had similar interests, but one thing I didn't relate to was how close he seemed to God. He spoke a lot about God, but not in an overbearing way, more of an, like in his everyday descriptions, perhaps something like, I knew God was telling me that, fill in the blank, or God reminded me to fill in the blank. I've long been a seeker of knowledge and wisdom, so my true jump into a Christian worldview would not happen until after college, but I was certainly still curious. Curious why I didn't seem to hear the word of God like others, and perhaps the topic of a future show, I thought something was wrong with me and needed help. Enough that I decided to take an elective not related to my major to help me find answers, a class titled The Bible as Literature. I really started to slow down and study the holy book and take notes. It was an interesting class. With a small group of people, the professor was great at facilitating discussion. However, I do remember my roommate Eddie speaking up when he learned I was taking that class. He was a little miffed. I mean, not upset. That's not really Eddie's style, but he was bothered. I asked him why. He said, I don't like that it's called that, the Bible as literature. It's not just literature. I wasn't even sure what he meant by that, and I didn't challenge him on it. After all, he was the English major. But what does the term literature mean? Let's ask our co-host, Artie.
Literature is defined as the body of written works, particularly those considered to have artistic or intellectual value. It encompasses various forms of expression, including fiction, poetry, drama, and essays, and often reflects cultural, social, and historical contexts.
I guess the way Eddie was using it, he seemed to imply that calling the Bible mere literature was calling it fiction. But again, I didn't challenge him on that. After all, back then, I was taking it as a way to find some big truths. These days, however, well, hell yeah, I'd call it literature, and largely a work of fiction written by a multitude of anonymous men with impossible stories like Noah's Ark and crazy characters like talking snakes and donkeys and outrageous situations like resurrected bodies. When I read the Bible now, I wonder how I didn't question it more. I agree with Dan Barker, who calls the Bible, quote, contradictory mishmash. It has some truth in it. It would be surprising if it didn't, unquote. In fact, Dan Barker is our Skeptic of the Week.
We think it's real important to question what you know. But before you leave this podcast, it's the Skeptic of the Show.
Dan Barker is an American atheist activist and musician who served as an evangelical Christian preacher and composer for 19 years, but then left Christianity. He and his wife, Annie Laurie Gaylor, are the current co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Dan is co-founder of the Clergy Project, a nonprofit organization who provides support, community, and hope to current and former religious professionals who no longer hold supernatural beliefs. You may remember our last episode featured a guest who directly benefited from the Clergy Project. Dan is an accomplished author of numerous articles and books. You can also find him advocating for atheism on the debate stage.
Let's hear more from Dan himself on a TikTok I recently found.
Let me ask you, there's 4 or 5 accounts of the resurrection in the New Testament. The New Testament gives contradictory answers to all of these questions. What time did the women visit the tomb? Was the sun shining or was it dark? Take your pick. Who were the women? Different lists. What was their purpose? Different purposes. Was the tomb open when they arrived? What do you think? Yes or no? Both. In Matthew, the tomb was closed and it opened after the angel came in the earthquake. Who was at the tomb? Different accounts. Where were these messengers situated? Different accounts. What did the messengers say? Different accounts. Did the women tell what happened? Yes and no. When Mary returned from the tomb, did she know Jesus had been resurrected? Yes and no. When did Mary first see Jesus? Could Jesus be touched after the resurrection? After the women, to whom did Jesus first appear? Different stories. Where did Jesus first appear to the disciples after the resurrection? Different stories. Matthew said it first happened in Galilee, which was 60 to 100 miles away. But John and the others say, no, it happened somewhere in the road to Emmaus or in Jerusalem. Did the disciples believe these men? What happened at the appearance? Did Jesus stay on earth for a while? You go through these things. They cannot be reconciled. No scholar, no Bible scholar has been able to write a coherent narrative to explain just basically what happened.
You can hear Dan Barker and his wife, Annie Laurie Gaylor, every Thursday on Free Thought Radio, which is consumable as an audio podcast as well. So back to college. When I completed my college course, The Bible as Literature, I set the Bible back down for a while. But I still met many more Christians, and one was an international student who was quite brave. She took the courageous step of inviting me out for coffee so she could share her faith with me, and bought me the book, More Than a Carpenter by Josh McDowell. I read it, and when I was an RA, 2 of my residents each asked if they could share their testimony with me. I listened. In fact, one of them talked for over an hour. And then when I was an assistant director at another dorm, one of my residents repeatedly asked if I knew Jesus. He also tried to convince me to take God more seriously if I cared about my afterlife. He then told me of the spiritual forces all around us and that I should put on the armor of God, as there were invisible battles being fought for our souls. One night, I was doing a security check of the entire dorm at 2 a.m. after a weird phone call. I found him asleep in the elevator. When I tapped on his shoulder, he quickly sprung up, exited the elevator, and said he and the Lord were okay. I later had to report him to our residence hall director because, to be honest, I was worried about his mental health. He was walking around the halls at all hours of the night, preaching. And so during a wellness check, he told the director that he could set things on fire just by using his mind. And it was then he had to leave our dorm and university. I still remember his father picking him up, and I sure hope he's okay today. I started this episode with a description of how some religious parents are fearful of what professors will do to brainwash their kids. Let's end this episode by flipping that. What if the professor was religious and the student was more skeptical? I don't think this conversation would actually happen at a Christian university. After all, many of those require students to sign a statement of faith. Speaking of brainwashing, students could very well lose their status as a student if their beliefs change or go against that signed statement of faith. But let's suspend reality for a minute, like we would when watching a movie like God's Not Dead, and listen in on a different conversation between a professor and a student. I will play the part of the religious professor, and Artie will be the student. Here we go. You're an atheist, aren't you, son?
Yes, sir.
So, you don't believe in God?
That's correct, sir.
Do you believe in science?
Absolutely.
Then you believe science has all the answers?
No, sir. Science doesn't have all the answers. It's a process of asking questions, testing, and refining our understanding. But it's the best tool we have for understanding reality.
What about morality, then? Can science tell us what is good and bad, right and wrong?
Not directly, sir. Science informs us about the consequences of actions and the impact they have. But morality is a product of human reasoning, shaped by empathy, culture, and societal needs.
So you agree that without a higher power, like God, morality is just relative, isn't it?
Morality evolves, yes, just like our understanding of the world. But that doesn't make it arbitrary. It's based on reason, compassion, and the desire to live peacefully with others. We don't need a deity to tell us that harming others is wrong.
So where does evil come from then? If there's no God, how do you explain the existence of evil, suffering, and cruelty in the world?
Evil isn't a thing in itself, sir. It's a label we place on actions that cause harm. People make choices, and those choices can be influenced by their biology, psychology, and environment. But these are human actions, not the result of some cosmic force.
But don't you see, without God, there's no ultimate justice. The wicked can get away with their deeds. Isn't that a problem?
That's an emotional argument, sir, not a logical one. We may wish for ultimate justice, but that doesn't mean it exists. That's why we have laws, societal norms, and institutions. We try to create justice ourselves, imperfect as it may be.
If you can't explain everything through science, doesn't that open the door to faith in something higher? Isn't it possible there's something beyond our understanding?
Of course, it's possible there are things we don't understand, but saying God did it doesn't answer the question. It stops the inquiry. Science encourages us to keep asking, to seek evidence and explanations, not to fill gaps in our knowledge with faith.
So, you believe in evolution?
Yes, the evidence overwhelmingly supports evolution as the process by which life has developed on Earth.
But have you ever seen evolution happening, son? Have you observed it directly?
No, sir, not in the sense of watching a species evolve over millennia. But we observe small-scale evolutionary changes all the time, like bacteria developing resistance to antibiotics. The fossil record, genetic evidence, and observable biological processes all point to evolution.
So you're asking me to trust scientists who say they have evidence, but whom you've never met. Isn't that faith?
It's not faith in the religious sense. It's trust in a method that has proven reliable. Science is transparent. The data is out there, the methods are repeatable, and anyone can verify the results if they wish. That's different from taking something on faith without evidence.
But how do you deal with the big questions? Why are we here? What's the purpose of life?
Those are important questions, sir. But they don't need supernatural answers. Life has no intrinsic purpose, given by an external force. We give it meaning through our experiences, relationships, and contributions to the world. We create our own purpose.
What happens after death, then? Without God, isn't death just the end?
As far as we know, yes, death is the end of consciousness. That's why this life, the one we have now, is so important. Instead of focusing on what comes after, we should focus on making the most of our time here, with the people we care about.
You seem very certain of your beliefs, son, but isn't that just another kind of faith?
No, sir. I'm open to changing my views if evidence suggests otherwise. That's what sets science and atheism apart from faith. They're flexible and based on what we can observe and understand. It's not about certainty. It's about being willing to question everything, including our own assumptions.
So, you don't claim to have all the answers?
Exactly. I don't claim to know everything, but I do know that curiosity, critical thinking, and evidence lead to progress. And that is where I place my trust.
Well, that sums up some of the highlights with religion during my college years. While I was still curious about Christianity, I wasn't settled on it. But I wasn't doubtful about it yet either. The serious pursuit of Christianity for me began as I was approaching marriage, and especially when I became a dad. That spiritual phase is coming up soon on another episode of Funny You Say That.
Dorm room, freedom takes the night. Turning pages, sharpen up my sight. Where's the proof? Don't close the door. Knowledge asks for something more. Give me more than just belief. Show me facts and true relief. I'm here to find where truth begins
Thanks for listening to our show. Our intro music was created by an anonymous supporter. Any other music or sound effects were provided by this week's co-host, Artie Fisher.
Have a question? Interested in being a guest, perhaps, to share a part of your personal questimony? Email us at HeySkepticalScott@gmail.com. You can also find Skeptical Scott on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and TikTok.
Drop the supernatural. Embrace the rational. Believe in as many true things as possible.
Otherwise, you may end up believing in something that is even more artificial than me.
May skeptical thoughts be with you.
And also with you.
Cheers.
Atheism ain't no crime. Question gods in your own time. Free to think and to explore in this quest forevermore. Give me more than just belief. Show me facts and true.